Shana Tova, a happy and healthy new year to everyone. I want to welcome both the roomers and the Zoomers, people participating in person and those participating online in person with their own sense of presence. I do want to remind those who are physically here in the room to make sure to silence any cell phones or pagers or other devices. Those online, you can keep them at full blast and won't bother us at all, even if it may bother you. The other thing I'll mention to those online, there are captions running on the bottom of the screen. If you want to continue to see those, feel free to leave those up. You will find some amusement as we try to do Hebrew in English transliteration. They'll try to translate it for you. It will come out funny. But if you want to turn off the captions, you can just click the CC button and that should turn off the captions for you as well. We are here at the beginning of the end. As I mentioned, we are marking the end of the Jewish New Year festival with Yom Kippur. And here we stand at, in some ways, a last opportunity, but also a first opportunity. We are beginning a new Jewish year, and in many cultures, we do New Year's resolutions. We think of ways we want to handle the year differently that is just beginning. And there is a wisdom in Jewish culture that offers the opportunity to let go of the past, but also to begin anew and to learn from the past to do better in the year that's beginning. And so I invite us all to enter into this space of reflection, of openness, of self-consideration, and also to open our hearts to be together as a community, both here and there and everywhere, at this time and at future times for those watching videos of this in the future. Our service begins on the first page of our Yom Kippur morning service, which is in your booklets, about a third from the end. And our opening song is a song that celebrates participating together from any place and from every place, Hinei Matov.
Integrity is our sense of self, self-honesty, self-reflection, self-harmony. We are the true judge. Yom Kippur is our moment of consideration when we study our words and behaviors and ask the hard questions. Have I been true to my values? Did I stand up for who I am and for what I believe, or did I betray my integrity? Can I rebuild from human failing to human achievement? To be true to ourselves, we must consider who we are and who we may become. We do not choose the problems we face, but we do choose how we respond. Our challenges define our choices, and our choices define us. The more power we find to direct our lives, the more courage we have to change ourselves.
This is an hour of change. Within it, we stand, uncertain, on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over?
Amen.
At times, our ancestors overemphasized human limitations and failings. Ashamnu, we are guilty. Bagadnu, we have betrayed, proclaims the traditional confession. Our humanism includes both realistic assessment and positive reinforcement, reminding ourselves of right actions we can support our better behavior. For this responsive reading, I will read the Hebrew and then we can say the English all together. This was originally written by Rabbi Avi Weiss. Ahavnu, together, we have loved. Berachnu, we have blessed. Gadalnu, we have grown. Dibarnu yofi, we have spoken positively. He'elinu, we have raised up. V'chasnu, we have shown compassion. Zeraznu, we have acted enthusiastically. Chamalnu, we have been empathetic. Dipachnu emet, we have cultivated truth. Ya'atznu tov, we have given good advice. Kibadnu, we have respected. Lamadnu, we have learned. Machalnu, we have forgiven. Nichamnu, we have comforted. Salalnu, we have been creative. Orarnu, we have stirred. Pa'alnu, we have worked. Tzadaknu, we have been just. Kivinu, we have hoped. Richamnu, we have been merciful. Shakadnu, we have given full effort. Tamachnu, we have supported. Tikannu, we have repaired.
Nothing. Nothing. You began as nothing, and you will end as nothing. And in between, everything and nothing. In between, joy and sorrow, beauty and decay. Everything you partake of, yours to bear, yours to see, to know, to give birth to, and to let go. None of it is yours to have.
Not even you are yours to have. You belong to a wholeness so great you cannot even conceive of it. No, it is not a blessing, a belonging. Nothing owns you. You are simply part of it. You came out of it, and you will return to it. You do not ever leave it. You are part of it forever. And this is your moment to be alive.
In a tradition that views Torah as sacred and values the study of Torah beyond all else, we consider with utmost care what is Torah and what it means to honor it.
The rabbis said, turn it, for all is contained in it. We turn and we turn, but not all is in it. We find we have more to add. We cannot read all our truths into a place where they have never been. So we invent and we inscribe and we ask, can new texts too become sacred? Can our own voices become Torah?
And throughout the process, we ask what it means to us to keep on wrestling with tradition. How do we know when we have wrestled enough? How do we know when it is time to let go, time to free ourselves for something new?
We ask these questions here today in the context of our service because questioning, in pursuit of our deepest truths, is itself a form of Torah. We ask our questions, fully realizing that well-meaning people among us may differ, perhaps vehemently, in their answers. It is not our purpose to be divisive, but we are already of many minds. Silencing the concerns will not diminish them. It will not make them go away.
Dare we ask these questions? Dare we not ask them? If not now, when?
I invite us all to rise as we learn from the wisdom of our people. Change is always difficult. When you combine the power of politics with the fervor of religion, change becomes a revolution that transforms both the present and the past. We live on the other side of a monotheistic revolution in the 6th century BCE, when all the other gods the Hebrews worshipped were fired. This divinity downsizing left just one Jewish God standing, Yahweh in his undivided Beit El, his house of God. However, if you listen carefully to the story the Yahweh alone revolutionaries told about their victory, you will get a glimpse of what had been traditional Jewish religion and how different it is from what we know today. Our reading today is from the second book of Kings, chapter 23. The king went up to the house of Yahweh, together with all the men of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the priests and prophets, all the people young and old. And he read to them the entire text of the covenant scroll which had been found in the house of Yahweh. The king stood by the pillar and solemnized the covenant before Yahweh, that they would follow Yahweh and observe his commandments, his injunctions, and his laws with all their heart and soul, that they would fulfill all the terms of this covenant as inscribed upon the scroll. And all the people entered into the covenant. Then the king ordered the high priest Hilkiah, the priest of the second rank, and the guards of the threshold to bring out of the temple of Yahweh all the objects made for Baal and Asherah and all the host of heaven. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron and removed the ashes to Bethel. He suppressed the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had appointed to make offerings at the shrines in the towns of Judah and in the environs of Jerusalem, and those who made offerings to Baal, to the sun and moon and constellation, all the host of heaven. He brought out the image of Asherah from the house of Yahweh to the Kidron Valley outside Jerusalem and burned it there. He beat it to dust and scattered its dust over the burial ground of the common people. He tore down the cubicles of the male prostitutes in the house of Yahweh at the place where the women wove coverings for Asherah. He brought all the priests from the towns of Judah to Jerusalem and defiled the shrines where the priests had been making offerings, from Geba to Beersheba. He also demolished the shrines of the gates, which were at the entrance of the gate of Joshua. He also defiled Tophet in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so no one would consign their son or daughter to the fire of Molech. He did away with the horses the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun at the entrances of the house of Yahweh near the chamber of the eunuch Natan Melech, which was in the precincts. He burned the chariots of the sun. The king tore down the altars made by the kings of Judah on the roof by the upper chamber of Achaz, and the altars made by Manasseh in the two courts of the house of Yahweh. The king also defiled the shrines facing Jerusalem to the south of the Mount of the Destroyer, which King Solomon of Israel had built for Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Sidonians, for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Milcom, the detestable thing of the Ammonites. He shattered their pillars and cut down their sacred posts and covered their sites with human bones. Josiah also abolished all the cult places in the towns of Samaria, which the kings of Israel had built. He dealt with them just as he had done to Bethel. He slew on the altars all the priests of the shrines who were there, and he burned human bones on them, and then he returned to Jerusalem. The king commanded all the people, "Offer the Passover sacrifice to Yahweh your God as prescribed in this scroll of the covenant." Now the Passover sacrifice had not been offered in that manner in the days of the chieftains who ruled Israel, nor in the days of the kings of Israel or the kings of Judah. Only in the 18th year of King Josiah was such a Passover sacrifice offered in that manner to Yahweh in Jerusalem. Josiah also did away with the necromancers and the mediums, the idols and the fetishes, all the detestable things to be seen in Judah and Jerusalem, and thus he fulfilled the terms of the teaching recorded in the scroll which Hilkiah had found in the house of Yahweh. There was no king like him before who turned back to Yahweh with all his might and soul and heart in full accord with the teaching of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. Do you hear some hostility to that previous tradition, some conflict? Can you imagine the laments of those who liked that old-time religion they were used to, with gods and goddesses and mediums and necromancers, and all over the place, not only in Jerusalem? It makes what we do at Kol Hadash seem downright boring. Do you hear the revolution taking place? A century earlier, another Hebrew king, Hezekiah, had tried to clean up Judean religion for Yahweh, but he obviously did not go far enough if Josiah still had all this work to do. What Josiah destroyed had been Judean religion for centuries. And now the complaints we heard against Jeremiah on Rosh Hashanah about the Queen of Heaven have some historical context. Did you hear the new beginning? If the book of the covenant that Josiah found, aka established as authoritative, was indeed the Torat Moshe, the Torah of Moses, as tradition believes, a Torah that was studied by King David and followed by all the good kings, how is it that from the days of the judges, just after Moses, all the way through all of the kings, they had never done Passover correctly? Did they just forget to read the book of Exodus? Or was this book of the covenant something new, claiming to be something old? Scholars mostly think it was the book of Deuteronomy, given the rhetoric of with all his might and all his heart and all his soul. Today, we live in a time of great changes. We must strike the right balance if our changes are to preserve the best spirit of what came before while transforming what we have inherited. How do we remember? How should we create? Each generation makes choices. I hope that our memories will be mature enough to contain both us and those with whom we disagree. Revolutions sound great until they set up the guillotines, and guillotines are hungry and need feeding. A revolution that fills old places with bones plants the seeds of future division. I invite us to rise as we return our Torah scroll to the Ark.
All people try and fail. The wise learn to forgive and try again. We can be too slow to forgive others. We are long to remember injuries and short to forget assistance. Anger and memory have their place, and forgiveness does not require forgetting. We forgive by choosing not to avenge, but by being open to second chances. Forgiving others brings us peace.
We can be too quick to forgive ourselves. We celebrate our successes and quickly explain away our failures. Dwelling on our shortfalls is not healthy, but neither is whitewashing them. Self-forgiveness requires honesty about the sides of ourselves we would rather not face. Forgiving ourselves brings us peace.
Let us pause for a moment of true forgiveness. Let us forgive others, and let us forgive ourselves.
It is challenging for us at times to sit quietly with our own thoughts and our own memories and experiences, but it is also healthy to learn to do so. And so I invite us to pause for a moment of silent reflection, to think back on the last year, to think forward to the next, and to create that space of forgiveness, to let go and to move forward. And now we resume our service. Blessed are you, world. In the archives of Kibbutz Beit Hashita, I discovered forgotten handwritten notes for a Passover Seder from 1927. Instead of the Kiddush, the author wrote, "Blessed are you, Kibbutz." In his footsteps, I widen the blessing circle and say, "Blessed are you, world," to praise your fragile, complex beauty. If you call the earth your mother, who birthed you in pain from the wombs of the mothers from Eve until now, if you call the world your friend, who upholds you, whether in a day of trouble or of joy, if you call the universe your helpmeet, who gives strength to both your weakness and your might, then join with me in these songs and we'll sing together in a world that fills our springs with blessings. Planet orbiting the sun from time's beginning till its end. Planet blue, green, and white. Planet covered with water and land and sky. Planet made of forests, lakes and seas, fields and sandy beaches. Planet Earth that we have seen from space, complete and alive before our astonished eyes. Like the enthusiastic kibbutznik who insisted on making his time new, let's make new what's old and make holy what's new, and join what's called secular to what's called holy and what's called material to what's called spiritual until the gulf between them disappears. From Einstein and his students, I learned that the elements in me were forged from the same furnace as the stars. From other great ones, I've learned to sit, breathe, pay attention with watchful eyes to a world filled with glory and wonders like me, like you, and like the stars. O blessed world, you give us each day visions and problems to solve and to praise.
We learn little from spoken rules and written advice. Words can inspire us, but rarely do they transform our lives. We learn from people, from the living example of living teachers. A father's integrity, a mother's warm encouragement, a famous leader's determination. People enter our lives and guide us by what they do, not by what they say. They embody the ideal and make it real enough for us to understand. Memory keeps alive the example of great men and women who taught us through action. It also preserves the behavior of more modest guides who touched our lives in simpler ways. We too shall be examples in a future world that we shall never visit. We are teaching others for a tomorrow that is beyond our grasp. Our actions will move others long after our words are forgotten. We are children of love. We are the heirs of generous hope. Parents and peers, family and friends are forever joined to us by bonds of affection and mutual experience. The pain of separation never completely disappears, nor does the fond memory of their lives. They are constantly with us, even when we do not think of them. Their influence brings us here today, that we may honor them by sharing our memories silently as a community of caring friends.
If I could ask you to stand for a moment, if you're comfortable doing so. There is no one season for memory. We can feel the absence of a loved one at any time of year, at any moment in their personal calendar of birthdays and anniversaries and special experiences in their life or in ours. Yet there is also a wisdom in creating a space in the calendar, a space even in celebrations, to reflect on the power of love and our connections to the past. It is often part of the beginning of wedding ceremonies, where we create a space to reflect on those no longer with us, to celebrate those joyous transitions. And so too with the launch of our new year, at each of these services on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we create a space to reflect silently on our connections to the past and on the love we still feel. I invite us to pause for a moment of silent tribute. In the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Proverbs, we read, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. The memory of a good person is a blessing to us. We will now hear a song celebrating connections to the past by Hannah Senesh. Please be seated.
Shir hem at mamav du veinam
In 2001, Rosh Hashanah began just 6 days after 9/11. 9/11 was not a Jewish disaster like the destructions of the Jerusalem temples or the expulsion from Spain, though of course many Jewish people were killed. You may recall internet rumors then that the Israeli Secret Service had told thousands of Jews not to come to work at the Twin Towers on that day. An early example that the internet is good for spreading ideas but not for the truth. 9/11 was the disastrous end of the long 1990s, from the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 to that clear September morning when some imagined an end to history, a cooperative new world order, a new globalism through internet technology and cultural exchange. And then the planes hit and the towers fell. Rabbis everywhere rushed to rewrite their sermons. In one of my sermons that year, the central metaphor I used was the need to destroy old foundations to create new buildings. Needed to change that. 20 years later, we are very weary of suicide terrorism, of geopolitical and economic conflict, and especially weary of the classic blunder of getting involved in a land war in Asia. So many problems require global solutions, and there is so little goodwill between peoples and nations. Indeed, there is little goodwill left within our own nation between each other. Another sermon content warning. Last night, I warned that my message would be all about Jews. This morning, the message is mostly about America with some Jewish angles. I am not a political pundit, and it is both inappropriate and illegal for me to endorse or oppose a political candidate or political party from the pulpit. As a private citizen, I can do what I choose, but as the rabbi of Kol Hadash, I am nonpartisan. That does not mean that I am not allowed to talk about the world outside these doors, or how our shared values impact what we do out there. I can and I should talk about issues, concerns, our place in the world, and so I will. In Philip Roth's alternative history novel, The Plot Against America, Charles Lindbergh wins the 1940 election on an isolationist platform, and large-scale anti-Jewish persecution comes to America. As a slow-moving pogrom approaches the Jews of Newark, one character says, "How can this be happening in America? How can people like these be in charge of our country?" Roth wrote his novel in 2004, thinking about the George W. Bush White House. But that line could have easily been written in 2020. And it could have been written by anyone along the American political spectrum. How can this be happening in America? How can people like these be in charge of our country? We know that conservatives aspiring to make America great again want everything to stop changing. For them, great was in the past, so we have to go back. They are dismayed that for the first time in 80 years of polling, less than half of Americans claim membership in a church, synagogue, or other religious institution. Ironically, by that metric, we at Kol Hadash are part of the more religious minority because we are members of a religious institution. These people are dismayed that society tolerates and even celebrates what used to be unacceptable. In 2004, the Republican National Committee was adamantly in favor of bans on gay marriage. In June 2021, the chair of the Republican National Committee tweeted this, quote, "Happy Pride Month. GOP is proud to have doubled our LGBTQ support over the last 4 years, and we will continue to grow our big tent by supporting measures that promote fairness and balance protections for LGBTQ Americans and those with deeply held religious beliefs." Some evangelicals were very upset by this tweet. But a survey on same-sex marriage released that same month showed 55% of Republicans in favor, with 73% of independents and 83% of Democrats. In fact, 71% of American Jews support rabbis officiating at same-sex ceremonies, and only 15% of American Jews flat out oppose rabbis participating in these partnerships. The basic human right to marry for love has mostly won, a change for the better, we would say. It is not just religion that MAGA wants to freeze in the 1950s. They also do not like increasing demographic diversity from immigration and birth rates, accelerating technological and industrial change, and the implications of falling rural populations and growing suburbs and cities. How can this be happening in America? How can people like these be in charge of our country? Sounds right to them. Of course, progressives today might say the exact same thing. How can people like these be in charge of our country? They look at the federal courts, the state legislatures, the U.S. Senate with dismay. In some ways, progressives have become the conservatives, trying to preserve past progress on voting rights and abortion while pushing forward on other issues. But seeing the previously unthinkable has shaken their confidence. A torchlit march of white supremacists chanting, "Jews will not replace us," increases in anti-immigrant and anti-Asian violence, and what they consider steps backward from the Obama era. They see the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services change its mission statement in 2018 to no longer describe America as a nation of immigrants. And they ask, what happened to American Jewish poet Emma Lazarus's promise to welcome huddled masses yearning to breathe free, inviting the homeless tempest-tossed, like our forebears, through the golden door? Progressives see millions of their fellow citizens not just passively accepting these changes, but welcoming them with enthusiasm. These progressives also lament, how can this be happening in America? So too the libertarian, whose vision of free market capitalism and personal liberty as the core of the American tradition finds no comfortable mainstream political home. Both parties cut taxes or spend without much of a care for deficits. Both seek to impose government control on personal decisions, on what goes into one's body, like drugs or vaccines, or what comes out in a pregnancy termination. Libertarians generally favor immigration and oppose social spending. Whom should they root for between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders? And let us not forget the poor moderate in the middle, now squeezed between extremes. They remember a time when there was dialogue and cooperation, or even just friendship across the political aisle, when bipartisan did not mean traitorous, and compromise was a compliment, not an insult. How can this be happening in America? How can people like these be in charge of our country? Indeed. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln quoted the New Testament to describe the politics of his day. "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He said, "I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided." Within 3 years of this statement, a bloody American Civil War had begun which would cost over 600,000 dead. Our current civil unrest is certainly a house divided, but with fewer deaths. Or maybe not. Official COVID casualties have now passed 650,000, and that may be an underestimate. Yes, not all of those COVID deaths are attributable to political conflict, suspicion of one's opponents, distrust of institutions, the results of a house divided. However, many of those deaths have been casualties of a house divided, particularly since we learned that masks and distance and a vaccine could reduce, if not eradicate, this plague on both our houses. How did we get here? I do not think that 9/11 was the disaster that radically changed the overall direction of American discourse. 9/11 intensified divisions that were already there. In my lifetime of voting, from the Clinton-Gingrich battles of the 1990s to Bush v. Gore at the Supreme Court to Obama birtherism. But it goes back much further in the American political psyche. There are worse options in the American political repertoire that may yet see a resurgence. Dig for yourself into historical political cartoons, partisan journalism and campaign rhetoric from the 19th century, or learn about electoral violence against African Americans and others through the first two-thirds of the 20th century. As divided as our house seems now, it has been even worse. Richard Hofstadter's famous 1964 essay, The Paranoid Style in American Politics, begins with, quote, "American politics has often been an arena for angry minds." Sounds familiar. It explores anti-Masonic conspiracies about Illuminati from the 1790s, anti-Catholic fervor from the 1830s to the 1890s, and the John Birch Society. Does this passage that follows ring familiar today? America has been largely taken away from them and their kind, though they are determined to try to repossess it and to prevent the final destructive act of subversion. The old American virtues have been already eaten away by cosmopolitans and intellectuals. The old competitive capitalism has been undermined by socialistic and communistic schemers. The old national security and independence have been destroyed by treasonous plots, having as their most powerful agents not merely outsiders and foreigners as of old, but major statesmen who were at the very centers of American power. This was written in 1964. From such a worldview, the terrible images and events of January 6, 2021 are no longer as inconceivable as they were on January 5th. We can also see how this worldview can feed into anti-Semitic tropes. Jews have often been called rootless cosmopolitans, undermining national identity and religious tradition with secular globalism, undermining the Protestant work ethic with foreign socialist ideas. Even if one does not descend into the fever swamp of online anti-Semitism, those in the mainstream who are committed to robust nationalism and traditional religion see those who would undermine these institutions as their enemies. As a recent critique of critics of Zionism put it, these have become un-Jews in their attack on robust Jewish people that is embodied in Israel and in their emphasis on broader social justice as the center of their Judaism, rather than Jewish particularism or tradition for tradition's sake. What makes the current moment particularly precarious is that we can feel attacked from the other side of the political spectrum too. If you really are a rootless cosmopolitan, a pure universalist, then Jews are too stubbornly distinct. If you really are a radical socialist, Jews with power in media, finance, and establishment politics are working against you. If you really are a secular globalist, then Jews in general and Israel in particular may be too religious and too tribal for the new world order you are working to achieve, even if you yourself are a progressive Jew. The 2020 Pew study of American Jews would be a goldmine for anti-Semites of either stripe. Almost 1/4 of American Jewish households earn $200,000 a year or more, compared to only 4% of the general population. The capitalist elite. 29% of all Americans have a college degree or higher. That describes 58% of American Jews, double the proportion. The intellectualist elite. Of course, we have our allies on either side as well, even if they only love some of us. Those who favor strong American nationalism and religious tradition see strong Israeli nationalism and modern Orthodox Judaism as models, even if they do not love secularized liberal Jews. And those secularized liberal Jews are stalwart supporters of LGBTQ rights, environmentalism, immigration, and other progressive issues, even if they are sometimes frustrated when, for example, the 2017 March for Racial Justice was scheduled on Yom Kippur. The march did eventually apologize for the oversight. And there are ongoing debates on the far left, sometimes intense, over whether Israel represents legitimate minority ethnic self-determination or illegitimate settler colonialism of Western culture. In some ways, we are caught in the middle of these political divisions because we don't fit in neatly in any one department, a religion, an ethnicity, a nationality. Over the course of my academic career, I took many classes in Jewish studies, but they were all over the academic departments. They could be found in religious studies, in this Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations, in history, in literature, and often cross-listed as both that and in Jewish studies. We don't fit in neatly. Well, how do we mend the house divided, the Jewish house or the American house? I'll give you a parallel in my response to this question. I often perform outdoor weddings, and whenever rain threatens, inevitably someone comes up to me and says, "Can you put in a good word so it doesn't rain?" I used to say, "Well, I'm not that kind of rabbi." But now I say, if I could do that, I wouldn't be doing this. If I could control the weather, do you think I'd be officiating weddings like this? If I had a silver bullet to slay the vampire of hatred, suspicion, and fear, I wouldn't be doing this. Platitudes about listening, understanding, finding shared purpose are all well and good, and they may make a difference here and there. In the past, we can find examples of divided houses coming together, and maybe there are lessons to be drawn from that history. At the end of World War I, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee was born after the devastation of Jewish communities in Eastern Europe. It was a merger of the American Jewish Relief Committee, which was supported by German Reform Jews, the Central Committee for the Relief of Jews Suffering Through the War, which was supported by Eastern European Orthodox Jews, and the Jewish People's Relief Committee of America, which was supported by Jewish socialists who were mostly secular. So there were already 3 different groups doing the same thing who eventually merged. Whoever suggested to Monty Python that they make a movie featuring the Judean People's Front fighting the People's Front of Judea definitely got something right. Or consider the unified American purpose during and shortly after World War II. Unthinkable in 1940 from a bitterly divided country between isolationists and interventionists. Or the post-war consensus in America against communism, even if Jewish socialists sometimes took the brunt of that consensus. Or the Jewish community's support for Israel shortly after its founding. Maybe all we need is another disaster or success to bring us closer together. Well, if you hadn't noticed, we are already in the middle of a great disaster, and we are further apart than ever. So lesson 1 is do not hope for disasters to bring us together. In our science fiction book club at Kol Hadash, we read a novel about the aftermath of an asteroid crashing into Earth. Now, based on what you know of politics, nationalism, history, and human nature, do you think that would bring humanity closer together or put us at each other's throats? We already face global crises, from climate to drinkable water to the pandemic, and I do not see Russia, China, the US, Europe, and Iran rushing to work together on any of them. The unity of September 12, 2001 faded far too quickly to expect a deus ex machina, a divine intervention in either a positive miracle or a mass destruction to save us from the worst angels of our nature. Lesson 2 is that we cannot minimize real differences. This summer, I was talking about politics with a friend who has a trans child. I commented that everyone, even political opponents, thinks they're being ethical from their own perspective. She said to me bluntly, "They want my kid dead." The denial of the reality of transness, the denial of gender-affirming medical care, the othering that takes place. Well, we know how high the suicide rates can be among trans teens. I could not argue with that statement because her anger is justified. Sometimes you have to fight. Lincoln did not want a civil war, but it needed to be fought to end slavery. There must be red line issues beyond which there is no compromise. They may not be the same for everyone participating in this observance today, but sometimes there is no middle ground on which to compromise. I do not believe compromise is a dirty word. I believe that we can find common ground with very disparate partners. The Catholic Church may be our foe on abortion and contraception, and our ally on caring for immigrants and teaching evolution in science classes. But the book of Ecclesiastes had it right that there's a time for war and a time for peace, a time to remain silent and a time to speak. Human rights and human life demand more than moderation. And last, I ended last night with the declaration that we are the majority in Jewish life. The fundamentalists, the isolationists, those who would make Judaism great again by freezing us in time or in place, they are the minority, the 20%. When even a majority of Republicans now support same-sex marriage, a tipping point has been reached on that issue in culture and society. So the lesson is, for those who believe in democracy, find the majority. Even the rabbis of the first centuries of the Common Era accepted, after the majority you will incline. Your allies may change for different issues, and you may not get everything you want. Incremental change may be frustrating for those who seek a revolution, but sustainable progress is still progress. For all the revolutionary excitement of the George Floyd protest moment, it is the election of new district attorneys and the passage of new policies on the use of force and civil asset forfeiture and ex-felon voting that might have the more lasting impact. Just this week, I read a story about a black family whose house was first assessed for well under an agreed-upon selling price. They then purged their house of all their family pictures and anything that indicated the owners were black, posters and books. They even borrowed their white neighbors' family pictures to display instead. A new assessment came back $92,000 higher. As one of the owners put it, "In the black community, we know selling your home means take down your pictures. Don't be present." As soon as I told my dad about our experience, he said, "Why was Erica home? Why didn't you take down your pictures?" He knew right away. Now, would we have heard this story in mainstream media without the racial justice moments of the past few years? This community already knew this to be true. I doubt we would have heard it. But I do have hope that the more of us who hear and are outraged by these stories, the greater the majority will become for fixing them. You cannot find these creative majorities if you only talk with those who already largely agree with you or share your experiences. So we do need some listening and understanding and stretching, along with the arguing and the coalition building. As we said on Rosh Hashanah, for humanists and for humanistic Jews, there is no cosmic why when disaster strikes. Temples are destroyed, people exiled, government buildings attacked, houses divided, hearts and bodies broken. And behind these disasters, we see no just supernatural system punishing us or testing us or improving us. Yet if we do not ask why, we must ask how. Not how did this disaster happen in an endless cycle of recrimination and regret? How so we can learn lessons from human suffering? How so we can reduce human suffering? There is no cosmic purpose to suffering, but we can create human purpose if suffering today leads to less suffering tomorrow, because we learn from it and we do better. When to get started? No day but today. A few brief announcements before we conclude our service today. First, I want to thank the readers in our service. They were Ilana and Elise Schaefer, Sue and Ilya Talman, Victoria and Julia Ratnaswamy, Lynn and Elliot Miller, and David Hirsch. Those who are here in person, feel free to take your service booklets with you as a souvenir or resource for future experiences. We do have our Values in Action collection for a safe place, which is happening at the conclusion of this service from 12:15 to 1:15. So if you are here and have things to drop off, please do. If you are remotely and would like to come by 2100 Half-Day Road in Deerfield to drop off one of those requested bags of supplies, it would be wonderful to participate in this doing a good deed. Our services continue this afternoon. Our family service will take place at 2 p.m., again online and in person, and our memorial service begins at 3:30 p.m. I want to especially thank the people who provided such beautiful music for our services this year. Our music director, Ellen Apley, Miles Andrew Sutton on the piano, Paul Vanderwerf on viola and violin last evening, and Laura Burke as a soloist and guitar, and of course our other soloist, Melissa Arning. Beautiful to have you as part of our celebration as we bring in the new year. I also want to make sure to thank our choir. Their names are on the blue sheet, but I'm going to read them anyways because they went above and beyond this year. You saw all the recordings they did to do it safely, but to be able to bring that music to celebrate with us. And so I want to thank Noah Apley, Melissa Arning again, Anthony Bellotti, Rick Bolnick, Ken Burke, Laura Burke, Shannon Burke, Irene Chase, Jessica Fisher, Toby Fisher, Melinda Harris, Ron Harris, Robert Hart, Rick Henriksen, David Hirsch, Ricky Katz, Emma Kowalenko, Judith Perlman, Sandra Schechner, Lori Schiller, Ellen Shepard, Jim Shepard, and Sue Talman. Our congregational year begins as we emerge from our high holiday season. I invite you to rejoin us for future programs on Friday nights and on Tuesday evenings for our adult education programs. Our service concludes on the last page of the evening service with a song that wishes each other a new year, a good year, a year of resolve, and a year of great beginnings. L'Shana Tova. I wish you all a Shana Tova. Please wish Shana Tova to the people near you.